to our session on innovation in sustainability. Sustainability in government and how government can reduce the carbon emissions of their work and the country. A huge topic, and we have got 49 minutes and 28 seconds to cover it, and a host of wonderful panellists to speak as well. So, UK government has committed to net zero by 2050. They've made commitments around emissions, around water, around waste, flights. The list is endless. And as I said, we've got an expert panel here who are going to look at our progress to date. They're going to share some of their best practice and also talk about the role of government in helping all sectors to get to net zero. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Jeremy Pocklington, Permanent Secretary at the Department of Energy, Security and Net Zero here in the UK. Rohan Malik from EY, who is UK and Ireland Managing Partner. Meg Nicholson, who is Deputy Director for Climate Change and Sustainability at UK Export Finance. Ravi Gurumurthy, who is the Chief Executive at Nesta. Hatla Sigurðardóttir. Oh, I didn't get that right. Almost, hold on. Hatla Sigurðardóttir. Better? No.
It's easier than the glacier.
Teach me at the end. Who's the Director General for the Department of Senior Management at the Ministry of the Environment, Energy and Climate in Iceland. And Donna Cadogan, who is the Head of the Public Service and Cabinet Secretary in Barbados. And I didn't introduce myself at the start. My name is Amrita Devaya, and I am going to be your moderator and facilitator today, and I am the Head of Civil Service Communications in the Cabinet Office. So, I am now going to turn to each of our panellists and ask them to set out their stall and answer a simple question, I hope. So, Jeremy, coming to you first. Can you tell us what is UK government doing and where are we on that journey?
Fantastic. Well, good morning. Great to see you all here. I hope you can hear me reasonably clearly amongst the noise. So, fantastic topic, and a really, really big topic, which very hard to do justice to very quickly. But what I want to do is just make a distinction between the government's role supporting and helping us achieve net zero for the economy as a whole, and then also the government itself reducing its own emissions as a part of the economy and society that produces emissions itself. On the first issue, achieving net zero as a whole. So the first thing I want to say is we shouldn't underestimate the progress that we're making. So I'm going to start with some good news for the panel. Only a few weeks ago, the ONS confirmed that our emissions as a country have reduced by half, by 50% since 1990. So we are halfway to achieving net zero. And the policy framework that has been in place for many, many years, since the 2008 Act, based on a sort of system of carbon budgets and a suite of policies, is making a difference. We're particularly making a difference in reducing emissions from what we call the power sector, that is electricity, to every single person in the country, apart from people that work on net zero, call it power for some reason, where now, I think last year, about 55% of the electricity that the country produced was low carbon, predominantly renewables with a tiny bit of nuclear as well. That is the good news. The more difficult news is that's the easier bit that we've done. In particular, closing down our sort of coal-fired power stations with the final power station closing this year. That has made an enormous difference to that. It's the harder stuff to come as we complete the work with the electricity system, make progress decarbonising heat, make sure our buildings are energy efficient, decarbonise industry, some of which is really, really difficult, and then do the really hard stuff, land use, and some bits of transport as well. So this is a huge problem. It requires massive investment. Our estimate is, well, we tend to rely on the estimate of around about 50 to 60 billion pounds a year of private sector investment over the next 5 to 10 years is the sort of the short to medium term estimate of what's needed. So attracting that investment is going to be key. Government is a big part of this as well. Government produces about 9% of emissions from buildings is from government buildings. We're the largest landowner in the country as well. So the other thing we may want to come back to in the questions is the important role of government reducing its own emissions. That is partly about having the right strategy, supported by the right funding and the right expertise to do that. For the UK government, that is overseen by something called our Greening Government Commitments, of which there is it's not just about net zero, it's about sustainability as well and biodiversity. But reducing greenhouse gas emissions is a big part of it as well. We've made good progress in recent years through a combination of big grant schemes as well, but also crucially departments embedding it in their core business, and that will be another theme that we need to come back to today as well. Perhaps there's quite a lot there. Perhaps I'll stop there.
There is a lot. As I said, this topic is huge. But thank you, Jeremy. Rohan, I'll pass to you and ask you, what makes the UK attractive as a destination for inward net zero focused investment?
Thanks, Amrita. So can I just say that it's ironical, we talk about sustainability, but we are freezing over here right now, right? This room is very, very cold, so I'm glad to see we're doing our part towards net carbon zero. But look, over the last 5 years, I've worked with 50 countries around the world, both mature markets, emerging markets, and every country is implementing its strategy towards net carbon zero. And what's very evident is that it will require, for every dollar, for every pound invested by governments like the UK, 10x in value from the private sector, which Jeremy referenced, whether that's capital, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's skills. Now, the second thing, which is quite clear, is there's a global race to attract that investment into each respective country. At EY, for the last 20 years, we produced the EY's Renewable Energy Attractiveness Survey, which looks at number of parameters and 100 countries. The UK, unfortunately, has slipped from number 4 to number 7 last year. So we can't be complacent about the agenda, but I'm also glass half full. I've seen last year thousands of new companies being created in the green sector, 75 billion pounds of goods and services in the net carbon zero agenda in the UK, and just under 800,000 jobs, which have also been created in the UK. So I see real potential. And when you look at areas around carbon capture and storage, nuclear, offshore wind, and hydrogen, we have real potential to be able to attract that private sector investment into the UK. So definitely a glass half full perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rohan. I think there's some really interesting topics to touch on when we get to Q&A around that investment piece, particularly. I'm going to hand to Meg next, who's going to, conversely, talk to us about how we are innovating in sustainability from an export angle.
Yeah, thanks. So I work for an organisation called UK Export Finance. So UK Export Finance is the UK's export credit agency. And our mission is to advance UK prosperity by ensuring no viable UK export fails for lack of finance or insurance, doing that sustainably as well as at no net cost to the taxpayer. So we're really quite a unique organisation within government. We're a central ministerial government department, but practically the way that we deliver our mission is through the provision of financial services to enable the purchase of UK exports. So we exist in this quite unique space with a central government department, with a public service mission, and as a lever of government to deliver government policy objectives, but operating entirely within the private sector. So practically what we do on a day-to-day basis looks and feels very much like what a bank does. And that puts us in a unique space with regard to sustainability as well and how we consider that, because when it comes to managing our sustainability impact, including reducing our emissions, but also more widely, we need to focus not just on our own operations, but on the emissions and the operations and the activities of our customers, many of whom are abroad as the purchasers of UK exports. So that principle of really focusing on where our sustainability impacts are the most material is really key to us and really drives a lot of the kind of innovations that we've developed in order to fill some of the gaps for our industry in this space. So, I mean, by way of context, UKEF has £60 billion of balance sheet capacity to support UK exports. We do that out of one half of one floor of one building on Whitehall. So clearly, if we were to focus on our kind of estate operations alone, we wouldn't be capturing anything like our full sustainability impact. So as I say, to do that, we've drawn on a number of innovations from across the kind of public and private sector worlds that we straddle, but I'll leave it there for now, and I hope we can get into that in the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Meg. Ravi, I'm going to come to you next and ask you, what do you think the role of the state is in sustainability?
Thank you very much, and hi, everybody. I'm from Nesta, which is a UK foundation focused on designing solutions to big societal problems, and one of them is sustainability. One of the things we think about is the type of net zero transition we're going to be making. Is it going to be one which is cheaper for consumers, where we have cheaper cars to run, cheaper homes to run, there are lots of good jobs that are created, and therefore wide public support across party? Or is it going to be a more costly transition where we don't reduce or flatten demand, we therefore have to build even more supply, we maybe don't build that supply, that electricity in the right places, so we have to build even more transmission and grid infrastructure? And the truth is, I think at the moment, it hangs in the balance whether we're in that sort of costly transition or potentially a really good one for consumers and jobs. And to get the best version, I think we have to think who is best capable of managing different risks, the private sector or the state, and we have to go through different bits of the system and ask that question. And I think the answer lies it's different for different questions. So let's take where can the private sector do more? Where should we construct markets to incentivize the private sector to manage more risks? At the moment, there's not a great incentive to build a power station in the right place or operate it at the right time. Can we construct prices that reflect those whole system costs and benefits better? Similarly, there's no real incentive for a retailer to help you reduce your energy use or flatten the demand, or for the operator of the distribution network to reduce the amount of pipes and wires they build, as opposed to reduce your own costs. So I think we need to think whether we need to construct those markets to incentivize different behaviors and therefore get the private sector to do what it's fantastically good at doing and innovate. But there are areas where I think we are asking the private sector to take risk where they're not really able to manage them. So for instance, on grid connections or planning consent, it's hugely problematic if you're making investment decisions and you're faced with that chronic uncertainty. Similarly, even with contracts for difference, a fantastic instrument for de-risking decisions, but the CFD lasts for 15 years, the lifetime of a wind farm may be much longer. Should we have a longer CFD, which might then help consumers because it will be cheaper because you're not asking the private sector to manage a risk that they can't necessarily manage? So I think there are areas like that where we need to just think from first principles where the risk should lie. I would caveat all of that I've just said with two big health warnings. First of all, it's quite common for economists to look at market design and think about what the first best solution is and come up with neat solutions. So 20 years ago, when we were thinking about how we make the transition to a net zero economy, when I was involved in shaping the Climate Change Act, I thought the whole economy would be under a carbon trading scheme. We'd have a nice simple carbon tax or carbon price. Actually, we've done it through a much more regulatory route. And often that's the right thing to do because it's politically feasible. So some of the first best answers are not going to be politically viable, and we should go to the second and third best rather than banging our head against the brick wall. And secondly, a first principles answer is nice, but we've also got to look at the costs of change, the costs of added complexity, and whether that is really worth the benefit, given we've not got very long to make many of these changes.
No, I think, really fascinating. Sometimes we remove the political context from the world in which we're working in and try and find that best possible solution. So really interesting, and I'm sure there are questions from the audience on that as well. I'm now going to pass to Hadla, who I'd like to know, obviously, with the news this weekend and everything that's going on, across the globe, but particularly in Iceland. What are you doing on sustainability and climate action in Iceland, and what's some of that best practice that you can share?
Yeah, thank you. And hi, everyone. Nice to be with you. Easy to fly in and out of Iceland because we don't have any ash to get in the way. While discussing climate issues and climate goals, we know of so many solutions, and so many have been mentioned here already today. But it's easier to talk, like you said, than putting things into action. And there are so many things that need to be thought of in the broad scope. We have to think about health, justice, equity, and very well, in a small country like Iceland, we are often posed the question, does it matter what we do? We are so small, really. Take one big company and they are like 10 times the emissions that Iceland had, so do we really have to do anything? Well, yes, we have to do something, and it is always a challenge to keep the spirit going. We are blessed with sustainable resources. We have, most of our houses are heated with geothermal power, causing some, of course we are worried now. If I divide a little bit away from the topic, I can tell you that in the area where we have the volcanic eruptions at the moment, there is a power plant that is providing like 10% of the homes with heat. So there are some worries about that. But at the moment, it's behaving and coming up at the right places. So if I go and tell you a little bit about the Iceland emission profile, it's unusual in many ways because all of our heating and electricity is provided with renewables. Hydro and geothermal. The biggest source of emitters are land use, like was mentioned before. And the next come the industrial processes, road transport, and agriculture, fisheries, and waste management. We have been rapidly changing the transport and the industry, but still more have to be done. We are number 2 in electric vehicles, and we are seeing electrification in the heavy duty. At the moment we are working on updating our climate action plan, and our minister has often been criticized because we don't have a climate strategy. We have it's a bit fractional, but we have a target of climate neutrality that was put into law in 2020. We are supposed to reach that no later than 2040. In the past 2 years, we've been working on this update of the plan, and we've been working very closely with the private industry. And we have come to, after the first round, it was evident that we needed the industry with us. We couldn't do it without the industry. So in the summer of 2022, we started approaching the Association of Businesses, and we have followed the examples that have been proven successful in both Denmark and Sweden, where the associations have kind of come with different plans. Well, in Denmark, the government just put a 70% emission target and said, just solve it. It's a possibility to do that. We haven't done it quite like that. So in last summer, we had 13 industries that issued their climate roadmaps. And now we're using those climate roadmaps in kind of putting it, intertwining it with the government climate plan. And our aim is to lower the emission by 55. However, we know that the actions that we have put on the map now are only going to get us to 35. So we still need more, but we also need to be realistic. If I tell you a little secret, we're having a little problem with the car rentals, and if I go very deeply also with the fishing industry, we need to get them better involved. They are willing, but you know, very often you have to put incentives, but you also need to put some, barriers to push them along. So I think, and if I look into the ministry, into the cabinet office itself, there is also a plan. And being on an island like the UK, most of the emissions inside, they come from just traveling. We also have waste that we need to target better. And then it's just the commuting to and from work. And all these things we need to work hard on. And recently there was we have to update that plan as well. But we did some summing up, and we found out that we're doing quite well within, but we still need more. And basically the biggest line out of it came that we need stronger leadership. We need stronger leadership from the ministers themselves. They need to push, and then we need to show examples to the agencies. And so by this, I wanted to give you a little bit like both the macro from Iceland, the state, and then from inside the cabinet as well. No. But I could talk very long, but I'll stop now.
No, it's really fascinating, and particularly I thought what was really interesting was that idea that you might be doing quite a lot of stuff in Iceland, but actually the impact of the emissions that are coming from elsewhere will still be felt by you. So whether, as you said, one company could be 10 times as much as what Iceland is managing. And finally, I'm going to come to Donna, who's been waiting very patiently, but I'm sure has very interesting things to share on the work of what Barbados is doing and some of the best practice in the sustainability world as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Barbados is an island in the Caribbean Sea. We are situated between the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. Like Iceland, we take climate change very seriously because, as you're aware, the impacts of climate change will be felt more by countries like Barbados than the larger countries. So we have basically decided to embark on a course of advocacy. I'm sure that most of you would be familiar with my Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, and the charge that she has been leading in terms of climate change. Speaking specifically about Barbados, we have had a sustainable development policy since 2004. We have been at this for a while. We have set very clear sustainability goals for ourselves and targets. As a matter of fact, we have set a very ambitious goal to be net zero by 2030. And we have taken steps in order to deliver on that goal. I'm just going to go through a list of some items that I have in terms of what we have been doing in Barbados. We have recently purchased a number of electric buses. We have right now 59 electric buses, and we have 12 more on order, and we are going to be purchasing another 24 in the next year, 2025. We have taken a policy where we will try to go sector by sector, dealing with the largest producers of emissions on island first. And as you are well aware, transportation produces about 40% of the emissions in most places. So we decided we would start there because we are very conscious of the fact that Barbados, being in the front of the charge in terms of climate change, we have to take definitive steps to make sure that we do what we are supposed to do. We have to lead by example. So we have gotten our electric buses, and we even have a bus which was sponsored by the UN, the Sustainable Development Bus, we call it. And this particular bus is branded with information on climate change. It goes all across the island, so we're using it as a PR element so that persons will become familiar with what is happening and the need for them to take measures in terms of sustainability, things that can really impact on climate change. So we have been doing that. In addition to that, Barbados has probably one of the world's largest percentage of solar water heaters. Now, these are photovoltaic systems which we have on our roofs. And right now, I would say we have about 70 or 80% of our households, they have solar water heaters. So instead of using fuel for, domestic heating purposes, we are using the energy, we are using what we have in abundance, which many persons would like to have. We have sunshine. So we have been using that type of power. Additionally, what we have done, we have developed that sector to the stage where we have some householders investing in excess photovoltaic systems, where they are able now to sell electricity to the national grid. So in this way, we can help everybody because we would be importing less fuel, less carbon-producing fuels, and therefore we will be doing our little bit to help in terms of climate change. Now, I must say, when I talk about our little bit, it is a little bit because Barbados, as a small island developing state, we contribute probably to less than 0.01% of carbon emissions, but we are trying, as I said, to lead by example, and we take it seriously because this is also linked with preservation of our environment, and we face an existential threat in terms of climate change when it comes to rising sea levels. Barbados is a relatively flat country, and indeed Bridgetown is almost which is our capital, which is almost at sea level. So you will understand if you have an inch or 2 inch sea level rise, how that will impact upon us. Plus, coming across the Atlantic Ocean every year, we have storms and hurricanes and that sort of thing. So it is very serious for us. We are a tourism-dependent economy, and therefore we have to look to preserve our coastline in particular. So about 10 years ago, we started to build a boardwalk. We decided we would build this boardwalk as a protective structure along the coastline. It is about, I would say it's about 2 kilometers on the south coast and about 9 kilometers on the west coast. Our tourism plan is mainly on the south coast and on the west coast. So we invested very heavily, probably costed us about 100 million Barbados dollars, which is like 50 million US dollars, to have this installed, but we have to protect our shoreline because, as I said, we are a tourism-dependent country. Going back to the core of the question in terms of sustainability and what the government is doing, in 2018, Barbados created a Ministry of the Environment and the Blue Economy, which focused mainly on what we are talking about here today, preserving the environment, both land and sea. So we did that, and that ministry has been doing some really good work. In 2020, we passed legislation, the Control of Disposable Plastics Act, which really outlined how Barbadians should treat to the use of plastics. We tried to get Barbadians to stop using the single-use plastics because all of these things contribute to the landfill, the amount of stuff that goes to the landfill, and therefore to the carbon emissions. So we instituted that, and I would say we have had quite good success. We can do better, but we have eliminated a lot of the single-use plastics. So that has been a very good success for us. There is also the Million Tree Initiative, where we are attempting to plant 1 million trees on a small island like Barbados because we know how trees contribute to the environment. So that is an initiative which is ongoing. It started around 2019. COVID interrupted a bit, but we have gone back at it full steam ahead. We have also been looking at our water resources. Barbados is one of the, am I going on too long?
One more point.
Barbados is one of the most water scarce countries in the world. And we have had to install a lot of water pumps because our water comes from the aquifers which are under the ground. We are a coral stone island. The coral stone filters the water from the rain. It goes down into our aquifers, and then we have to pump it back up. So therefore, we would have been using electrical pumps for this process, but we got some financing from the Green Fund, and we have installed photovoltaic systems. So we have cut down on the amount of fuel that we have been using in that regard. So that is another positive. In terms of electric vehicles, I spoke about the electric buses already. We have instituted a policy of getting rid of all of our fuel charge vehicles by 2030, which is very, very ambitious. And in order to do that, the government has put some incentives in place for persons who operate or who are part of the public transportation system in the purchase of these electrical vehicles, they have concessions, tax concessions, in order to encourage them to purchase, and that is going quite well as well. What else should I highlight here? There's so many things that we are doing.
I might see if we can pull them out. Oh, sorry, go on, Donna.
I just want to mention the debt for Nation Swap initiative under the Bridgetown initiative that our Prime Minister has sponsored. This is an initiative where countries who are heavily indebted, like Barbados, reach out to other entities, the financial institutions, and get them to buy into the sustainable development policy of the country by reducing some of the debt which is owed on the condition that the government itself we implement sustainable policies and therefore try to reduce our carbon footprint and contribute to the overall good of the world. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Donna. I'm sure there are a number of questions in the audience. And while the microphone comes, there's two here at the front, while the microphones come forward. If you haven't seen the Barbados Prime Minister speak, her speech at COP26 was one of the best things I've ever heard. So do look at that on YouTube. Yes, question here right at the front.
Thank you. My name's Gavin. I work for the Department of Work and Pensions. There's lots of discussion today around artificial intelligence and technology. What new technology or innovations do you expect to make a big change in terms of sustainability over the next 10 years? Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. I am going to, does anyone particularly have a burning desire to answer this question? Ravi, they're pointing at you.
Okay.
I'll go to Ravi first.
So that's a hell of a question. Just on, in some ways, many of the technologies we're going to have to apply in the next 10, 20 years are already here. So heat pumps or renewables, and it's important that we actually make use of those tried and trusted technologies. That said, I think the ability to smartly manage demand and optimize our systems using data and AI could be hugely transformational for reducing the overall cost of the system. There are other sort of more novel technologies, SMRs, or small modular reactors for nuclear, or the application of synthetic biology, for instance, could have quite revolutionary effects. But I think, given the time scale, I would go hard on the tried and trusted mature technologies because we just don't have time to wait for the R&D and the innovation to come through on some of the more exciting stuff.
Fantastic. Did anyone want to add to that? Yes,
yeah,
go on.
I can be cheeky if I can answer your question and say the technology is not tech, but it's actually about two simple things. One is, how do you make 1 + 1 = 3, which is about public-private partnership. And Jeremy spoke about the fact that we need to attract private sector capital to come and work back here in the UK and globally. And the second one is planning. It's not technology, it's process simplification, if I can call it that. As an example, it takes 12 years to get planning permission here in the UK around new power transmission. It takes 3 to 4 years in Europe. So it may not be AI-generated technology, it's planning consent. That would be the biggest breakthrough for me.
Where did the microphone go to? Yes, do you want to ask your question, please?
Hiya, I'm Maudie Spurrier from the Environment Agency. Does the panel think that there's a risk of over-reliance on innovation and new technologies when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, given that many technologies are unproven at scale? And if so, how do we manage that risk and ensure that governments are pursuing a range of solutions to address these problems, including behaviour change and a reduction in overall consumption?
I am going to go to Hadla first, then Donna, and then Jeremy.
I'm going to jump on that question because it's a very good question. In Iceland as well, we've been working on a sustainability strategy that is focusing on changing behaviors. But changing behavior is always more difficult than if you have a handy technical solution that you can grab. But we are working on that as well. But it is also like a challenge. But that's also included in our action plan on how we can do that. But I just wanted to grab that question as well and link it with the other one, although I'm not I don't know that much on the AI, but on innovation, because I think it's very important that we stick to the fact that we need to cut emissions first. But then, obviously, we need some other solutions as well. And just by saying that we are quite proud in Iceland of a company called Carbfix, that is basically capturing CO2 and just mineralizing it by putting it down into the ground. And this was an innovation that was actually made by one of the geothermal companies that needed to capture sulfur from the air. So this Carbfix method was a byproduct of the other one. And so that one has been kind of proven. But we also have to be careful with so many. There are many, I don't know what you call them, like who want to bring up a big solution, but they need to be scientifically proven before we really take them as a number one solution. So.
Absolutely. Donna, did you want to add to that? Oh, so the question was around how we, I guess, create behaviour changes, as well as whether we, and apologies, Maud, if I reframe this slightly incorrectly, but as well as how we consider whether we need to bring in new technologies and new, am I getting this right? Do you want to? Yeah, over-reliance on innovation. So actually, how are we using tried and tested methods and creating behaviour change, so getting people to do things differently?
Okay, in terms of behavioral change in Barbados, we do recognize that we have a certain culture. We're an island state, so life is a little slower. And we have been paying attention to this question of having to try to change people's mindsets, how they function, how they think, and that sort of thing. And in my office, as the head of the public service, I am responsible for public service transformation and also national transformation. So we have been looking at the whole question of changing attitudes and, you know, the way how people go about government, the way how people function as citizens, not really paying attention to the environment and that sort of thing. So we have decided that we're going to engage some change management communication specialists, and they are going to be the ones that are going to be working with the various ministries in government and then going into the public arena. So that's how we are going to be going after that one. In terms of innovation, yes, we recognize that we do need all of the specialist help that we need. Barbados is coming into the transformation game very late. Other countries would have been doing this now for 2 decades, and therefore we have a lot to catch up on. But the good thing about it is that we are able now to learn from the mistakes that some others have made, so that our route, our journey should be a little shorter.
Fantastic. So Jeremy, then Ravi.
So great, absolutely great question. So our primary focus should be on deployment of existing technologies. Although it can feel like a long way, 2050 is not that long away. It takes a long time to build the big systems that we need, low carbon electricity system, the hydrogen economy, the system around carbon capture that we're going to need to develop in this country. So our primary focus needs to be on deployment. But deployment will in itself lead to innovation as well. And that is important. We've seen that in an incredible way with renewables over the last 10 years, and the efficiency and the optimization around offshore wind in particular is frankly astonishing and greater than anyone expected. We're also seeing significant improvements in the technology and the efficiency around heat pumps. That means they work now in far greater proportion of homes than they used to. We also need to keep going, though, with innovation, even if we don't think a widget is going to suddenly be the miraculous solution that helps us achieve net zero in a costless way. Innovation and AI could make a big, big difference to the optimization of the electricity system in particular, and it's worth the investment. Innovation can also lead to improvements in materials and how those materials are used. There's some very, very exciting things happening in solar, in the solar space at the moment, just for example. So we shouldn't give up on innovation, but yes, deployment has to be there first of all. Behavior change, I mean, it's a fascinating big topic and quite a sensitive topic as well. The thing I would say about thinking about behaviour change, which of course is going to be important, is as we're achieving net zero, it's really important that we keep the overwhelming consensus of the great majority of people in this country on our side as well. I am very conscious about keeping a sort of focus on what is happening in other countries that have had challenges in recent years. So in Germany, they've had to row back on some of their policies around heat boilers. In the Netherlands, some of their policies around sustainability and biodiversity have had to be slightly put on pause. And ultimately, it's about keeping consumers on side, which ultimately I think will go to the cost of the transition and how that is managed, and the quality of services that are provided through that transition as well.
Fantastic, Ravi.
I think in theory, you want to try to have a diverse range of technologies and run a technology race that allows you to hedge for failure. So if certain technologies are publicly unacceptable or don't come down the cost curve or are problematic, you've got other options. And I think you can do that to some extent in electricity, whether it's floating wind turbines or CCS or nuclear. It's worth keeping those technologies in the mix for as long as we can. But I think increasingly, given the timescales, it becomes hard to basically not decide between big systemic changes. So between hydrogen or heat pumps for decarbonising the heating system, we're going to have to switch off the gas grid or boost the electricity grid. And I think basically we have to make that choice now to go down the electrification and heat pump routes. That's an example where I think we've run out of time to continue hedging and running a technology race. On behaviour change, I think it's critically important in a few ways. One, there are certain areas where it's going to be very hard to find technological solutions, particularly on food and agriculture, where I think you do need some consumer change. And the fact is that food tastes and preferences have shifted massively over the last 20, 30, 40 years in all sorts of countries. It's possible to do that. I think the other factor is that many of the consumer behaviour changes we want are one-off as opposed to habitual. So it may be agreeing with a provider when you want your home to be hot, and allowing a provider to optimize the heating and EV charging. That's a much easier switch, I think, for consumers to make than say, look, can you constantly start switching on and off your electricity, your appliances to manage demand? So I think there's one-off shifts on buying an EV, buying a heat pump, having a different relationship to your electricity provider are pretty important. There are things where I think we need to buy ourselves time. So it may well be that on flying, we may not be able to decarbonise aviation as fast as we might need, and we might need to moderate demand in some way. Just to echo what Jeremy said, I think public acceptability as well as behaviour change is really important. So the cost is important, but also the degree of mandation. And when do you mandate? And do you make it a no-brainer choice where we guarantee it's cheaper? Do we give some people opt-outs? Do we give a very long signal? One of the problems that's happened in the Netherlands and in Germany was that it was a short-term transition rather than giving people 5-10 years to say we're making a green switch over a period of time. So we're at Nesta, one of the teams at Nesta is called the Behavioural Insights team, and we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment on public acceptability and what we can learn from international examples about what works and what doesn't.
Thank you. Whilst the microphone gets the other question, I think it's really fascinating. A number of you have spoken about the political context and public acceptability and understanding the sort of space in which we're operating in. Slightly my own question, but I just wonder how that plays out in the context of spending reviews, funding innovative tech solutions and programs that may fail in that first iteration and actually lose funding when it could be the second or third that could be the solution we're looking for. And again, particularly in the UK and actually in a number of nations across the world, how that then plays out in a general election context as well. I appreciate that that's my own question and the microphone has gone somewhere, but I would be interested, sorry guys, in whether any of you have any views on that.
Well, let me probably Jeremy should answer the question about spending review, but let me answer the question just from a private sector standpoint. So the UK attracted £200 billion of investment in the last 14 years in net carbon zero. And there is currently $3 trillion of dry powder in the economy globally, looking for a home, right? So whilst we look at spending review as a structured way in which one would solve the problem from public finances, the answer has to be public-private collaboration. So I would definitely use that, Jeremy, as a cue to say, how do you ensure policy which is friendly enough, has a clarity and risk-reward mechanism for the private sector, but has a long-term economic growth and benefit to the private sector to be part of the spending review consideration?
Two things to say. So, first of all, we can get this right. I want to give a very concrete example of when we did get this right in recent years, which was actually took place in the spending review around about the time of sort of COP26 in Glasgow, where we had a spending review which is brought together with the net zero growth strategy at the same time. So there was a clear plan that was funded in the spending review that has enabled a significant increase of resources on this agenda in recent years and is still being delivered. So we can get it right. The other thing I would say about spending money on R&D and innovation is this actually is another area where there has been a lot of political consensus over recent decades, and actually that money has been protected in successive spending reviews by different parties, and that really has made a difference. So I don't think in itself, because some of these things lead to failure, that doesn't mean there doesn't have to be political consensus around it. I think the bits that are harder are where you're actually asking consumers to actually change how they live their everyday lives. That is the bit that I think is actually the more sensitive.
Where is the microphone? The microphone is down here.
Hi, so I'm Rose. I currently work at the Department of Work and Pensions, but in a previous life working in regional government, one of the key things that we found was that there was a great appetite amongst the whole of our local government to work on the green agenda, but then everyone was kind of, but what do I do? What does that mean for me? And at the same time, we found that we quite often amongst us had the solutions to our own problems. So we found that our great, lofty agenda for sustainability, we simply didn't have the supply locally, so the skills and expertise to be able to deliver on that. In come our work and skills and our education teams to help create that expertise base locally. That feels much harder at a national level, especially in the way that our departments work together, which is quite often by persuasion. So I wonder, what are the key elements that help a government at the national level to understand their role and to deliver what's needed across the different departments to be able to deliver those lofty ambitions?
So it's how do you distill the ambition at the top to make it work at the...
What does it mean for me?
Go on, Hadla, and then Ravi.
I can maybe you have to really understand that I am aware that Iceland is much smaller than the UK in population wide, but we have actually started an initiative like 2 years ago to work with the regional authorities, and we divided the country up in like 12 areas. And we asked each and one of them to go and talk to each other and find out a question, a theory or something that they wanted to answer. And then everyone came out with a different question, like how do I deal with waste in my area? How can I use better the geothermal energy? Stuff like that. Other were dealing with methane in agricultural areas. So, and we actually made a program around that, supported them financially, and so we gave kind of the power and the agenda to that region, with the saying as well that you have to learn from each other. So they were not allowed to copy each other. They could work together, but at least I think that gave a very nice initiative that, or thought at least that. We are looking at it locally, and this has fed up to the updated action plan in climate that we're working on now. But I can tell you a lot had to do with waste, and we have had a report from one of the region that was called 200,000 tons of opportunities. They found so many ways that they could do better with circular economy and waste and creating energy from waste and stuff like that. Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. Ravi?
So I think the next phase of the transition, given the importance of EVs and heat pumps and the grid infrastructure, we're going to actually have to think about the geography of the transition more. That is really challenging because local authorities don't have the capacity to do it. National government, particularly DESNZ, has not always interacted as strongly with local authorities as it needs to. So in the next phase of transition, I think you do need to think about that delivery chain more, and it's going to require quite a little bit of joining up between DESNZ and DLUC, which I think has improved in recent years, but probably needs to go further.
No, fantastic. I've got a red flashing light down here, so that is the end of our session. I think some really interesting points made by our panel and some really excellent case studies of the work that is already taking place. For me, the sort of key takeaways are the importance of strong leadership in this space, so actually making sure you've got someone who's advocating for the lofty ambitions, as Rose called them earlier, that private-public partnership, and how do we actually replicate to innovate, and it's not necessarily about creating something new, but actually using systems and techs that already work. And thinking about how we actually influence, whether that's through the sector in the work that we do on our inward investment or exports, through our supply chains and also internationally, in order to create some of that behaviour change that we're talking about.